Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Commissioners Board Briefing. Today's meeting is a hybrid board meeting. Some presenters and guests will appear in person and some will appear virtually. For those presenting virtually, please mute your mic when not speaking, and when presenting, make sure to unmute your mic and turn on your camera. For all presenters, please state your name for the record before speaking or responding to questions. Today's first briefing is on the Workplace Equity Strategic Plan, Charter, and Process. And I'm so excited to have this presentation today. So we'll ask the presenters to come on up. And we'll begin with our Chief Diversity and Equity Officer, Joy Fowler. Welcome, welcome everyone.
Well, good morning, Chair and Commissioners, those in person and virtually. Joy Fowler here. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Chief Diversity and Equity Officer for the record. The Office of Diversity and Equity is really thrilled to be here today to provide both an update and our roadmap for the next iteration of the Workforce Equity Strategic Plan, better known as the WESP. This renewal will look to engage all levels of the organization and include ongoing updates as we move through each phase of the process. Our office recognizes the importance of communication during this time so that county employees, even those that may not have the capacity to be actively engaged, still feel like they are part of the process because of the regular updates. As I mentioned, when the ERU presented the Multnomah County employment trends, if we want to be an organization that states we inclusively lead with race, we have to really understand that we want to demonstrate that commitment is not only through our recruiting efforts, but also through a retention strategy that is equally as effective. We understand Multnomah County has work to do to ensure that we retain our diverse workforce, and the Workforce Strategic Plan is the other part of the solution to getting there, or one of the parts of the solutions to getting there. A very big thank you, very big, and in a sincere appreciation to both Alejandro Juarez and April Roman as I turn it over to them to walk us through the proposed plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy.
Good morning.
Good morning. So my name is Alejandro Juarez. I use he, him pronouns and identify as Latinx and queer. I am the Workforce Equity Manager with the Office of Diversity and Equity. And I want to begin by acknowledging the history of the WESP, which was initiated through a collaboration between our community partners, ASME Local 88, and our Employee of Color Resource Group. Their work elevated the concerns of staff of color and other protected classes to the Board of Commissioners and to the entire county. Together with the support of the Board of Commissioners, and with the support and the continued investment and that of the county leadership, we were able to embark on an ambitious journey to address racial and other protected class disparities over the last 5 years. And it was an ambitious task. Multnomah County is a large and complex organization with multiple lines of business, operating 10 departments and 10 offices. The county's human resource function operates under a decentralized model in which each department houses its own HR division, each with its unique structure and practices. Fulfilling the WESP recommendations required additional resources, and the Board of Commissioners has continued to invest in this infrastructure. It's important to note that these investment decisions were made through a proactive and significant collaboration with employee resource groups, the Office of Diversity and Equity, the county executives, and industry experts in workforce equity. These critical investments have allowed the county to complete the recommendations outlined in Focus Area 5 of the WESP, and today we are tasked with continuing to implement and support the initial goals outlined in all 5 focus areas. And can we next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So the graphic on the screen displays the critical WESP infrastructure that was built over the last 5 years. Thanks to your support and investment in workforce equity, we are currently able to leverage this infrastructure to continue our work to implement workforce equity efforts and go further by engaging in a process to renew the WESP for the next 5 years. Today, we'll be sharing our 2023 WESP renewal proposal. This is essentially our plan for the plan. We are tasked with producing a multi-year strategic plan while incorporating the lessons learned over the years to continue addressing and eliminating and preventing workplace disparities. Next slide, please. So this proposal builds on previous commitments and collaboration between various stakeholders who work together to implement the WESP. Who work together to implement the WESP recommendations, and who we plan on convening on a regular basis over the next 9 months to identify strategies, design solutions, and write recommendations for the next iteration of the WESP. We're also paying close attention to our engagement strategies to make the most of our time with stakeholders to solicit and incorporate feedback into the process as we move forward. Next slide, please. In addition, this proposal acts on feedback from staff, ERGs, and stakeholders, and recommendations from our WESP process evaluation and information gatherings that we held earlier this year. The three main themes that we have identified were on engagement, operations, and communications. Engagement was the issue of most concern for those involved with the WESP. There are many challenges with engaging employee resource groups, represented staff across the county, and internal stakeholders. Staff and stakeholders raised issues with being limited in providing feedback and lacking active participation in the design and implementation through a participatory process. There are many operations questions, and we heard feedback regarding the lack of clarity and specificity when it came to identifying budget resources and capacity. In addition to concerns regarding the time frame and alignment of strategies with our fiscal calendar. There were also questions regarding the quality improvement and application of our equity frameworks, such as inclusivity leading with race and the equity and empowerment lens. And finally, we heard concerns regarding communications and reporting. Stakeholders would like to have intentional and consistent updates on the work and a countywide internal communication strategy to promote workforce equity, in addition to consistent and predictable reporting on employee trends and data. And so these are these recommendations and these considerations are things that we're trying to, well, hopefully within our proposal address, and in designing our process. We skip, next slide, please. And so in order to do this, we took inspiration from existing internal and external equity-centered community engagement processes, such as our community budget advisory committees, who identify priorities for our budget. We took inspiration from the Multnomah Leadership Academy, operated by Organizational Learning, where we invite staff to develop their leadership by working on countywide issues, and from the Health Department's Equity Leadership Program that was focused on implementing WESP strategies for the Health Department. In addition to something that's not noted here, the work from the Multnomah Idea Lab in creating our definitions for inclusively leading with race. Next slide, please. So we plan to strategically engage stakeholders throughout the process by providing more opportunities for participation. We have shared this proposal with Chair Vega Peterson, the Chief Operating Officer Serena Cruz, and the Chief Human Resource Officer Travis Brown. We look forward to engaging with the rest of our stakeholders with this proposed plan during our plan launch and equity forum that April will discuss. Next slide, please. So we heard a lot of feedback from the previous WESP committees that the previous WESP committee structure was too large, and it was difficult to address some of the concerns as they came up throughout that process. And in order to move forward with this process, we designed our structure to create a steering committee to help us through the next 9 months to make decisions as we engage work groups to work on recommendations and proposals. And this renewal steering committee is going to be a temporary decision-making body to steer the renewal process. The committee will be smaller and serve to review the work of the work groups and guide them through the process. The steering committee will report to the county executives, and they will be charged with communicating with department and office directors and the board of commissioners, the sheriff's office, the county auditor, and the district attorney. Next slide, please. And so the Renewal Steering Committee is a temporary decision-making structure that will convene the work focus area work groups. We plan on convening a focus area work group that is designed on West governance to help us steer the work for the next 5 years. They will address the essential questions on how we will operate and implement the West over the years, and it will be comprised of staff from countywide. The steering committee will be comprised of staff from countywide workforce equity initiatives and employee resource groups. And we will be having a nominations process, and we'll be identifying the committee members through by the project team, and will be appointed by the executive committee. Next slide. The focus area work groups is where the work is going to be. We plan on holding a nominations process to recruit staff from across the county and paying close attention to representation of represented employees, internal stakeholders, demographic diversity, and those who are interested in any particular focus area. The recruitment will invite ERG members, Department Equity Committee members, and general staff to apply to serve to the focus area groups. The West Steering Committee members and ODE staff will serve as liaisons for the work groups to help them guide their work and help them address any issues with decision making. Next slide, please. As far as decision making and accountability, the Renewal Steering Committee will convene on a regular basis over the next 9 months and help review the work group, the process. Will help review the work of the work groups and guide the process of the focus area work groups. The focus area work groups will develop charters, and liaisons will be identified to address the barriers in decision making. And at the final stage of the renewal process, we anticipate that the updated West recommendations will be presented to the Board of County Commissioners for approval and adoption. Next slide, please. And here is where I will, how are we going to do this? I'm going to hand this over to April, who will walk you through those details.
Thank you, Ale. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is April Roman. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as white, Latinx, and non-binary queer. I will be walking us through some of the project management lens of this effort. We have organized this process into 3 phases. Phase 1 includes the research and launch, where we are currently. We are conducting an analysis of workforce-related commissioned reports, employment data, engagements, and audits to be prioritized by our West Renewal Committee. Phase 2, we're anticipating beginning in May with a design process. So once we have our committee structure in place, we will engage in a design process examining organizational concerns such as funding, capacity, culture, and policies to prioritize our areas for recommendations for the renewed WESP. In phase 3, we'll be drafting. The recommendations will need to be prioritized, reviewed, and approved by the West Review Committee and the Executive Committee before we come back here to the Board of Commissioners to present our recommendations. Next slide, please. This slide shows the project timeline from start to when we return to this board with our renewed WESP in November. This timeline allows us the opportunity to practice some of our commitments from previous engagements and the Inclusively Leading with Race design process to include more stakeholders in the development and implementation of the next Workforce Equity Strategic Plan. Luckily, as I mentioned, we are building upon a solid foundation of the original WESP and numerous previous engagements and reports, so we are not embarking on a blue sky process. This is more of a prioritization and strategy identifying process. And we have the opportunity or the capacity of equity and countywide initiative staff to build the infrastructure needed to be successful in its implementation. Next slide, please. The project team is currently analyzing previously commissioned reports, best and promising practices, countywide employee survey results, the ERU's employment trends report, and other employment data to identify issues and themes, strategies for solutions, and evaluation metrics related to workforce equity. This analysis will be presented to the WESP Renewal Steering Committee to inform the assignment of our focus area work plans, priorities, and ultimately the recommendations for the renewed WESP. This analysis aims to identify structural barriers to WESP implementation, strengthen oversight and accountability, and clarify management and supervision. Some of the themes and areas of focus that we're pulling include hiring and recruitment, advancement, learning and development, retention and separation, the roles and responsibilities of ODE and the other countywide offices, the WESP oversight structure, as well as exploring identity-based concerns such as trans inclusion and well-being at the county and Black African American promotion and retention. Next slide, please. This project will deliver the countywide workforce equity strategic framework and guidance for the next 5 years. Departmental implementation support with identified leadership and monitoring structures, consistent understanding of workforce equity definitions, values, framework and evaluation methodology for the county, and ongoing stakeholder engagement, oversight structure, and relationship building around our workforce equity priorities to create a community of practice around inclusively leading with race and safety, trust, and belonging. Next slide, please. WESP renewal outcomes include the development of short and long-term goals, strategies, priorities, and resources needed to advance the workforce equity. This should also affect staff by shifting some of the power dynamics in decision-making. We have heard, as Ali mentioned, that from many staff that they didn't feel the impact of the first WESP. Having more ownership and engagement will produce more buy-in and actual felt impact in their daily work. The equity and empowerment lens will be applied to recruitment, retention, and promotion activities more consistently to eliminate barriers to equal employment opportunities by looking at measurable, improved outcomes for equity, utilization, retention, promotion, and employee satisfaction. One of the outcomes will be improved job experience and satisfaction for all employees, particularly those who have faced barriers to equal opportunities and have not enjoyed equal levels of job satisfaction because of their race, ethnicity, national origin, disability, gender identity, sexual orientation, and other protected classes. And ultimately, a more diverse and healthier workforce with ties with our community partners and service providers who better reflect the community we serve will lead to more effective services for the community. Next slide, please. As part of the WESP implementation efforts, a commitment to transparency in process and stakeholder engagement will be shared among the renewal project teams and their planning. There will be a centralized plan to ensure all stakeholders will be kept informed and engaged accordingly. This flow chart shows the ways we plan to share written updates, engagements, and presentations to and from our stakeholders. It's a little bit difficult to see, but on the next sheet you can see, next slide, we can see some of the ways that we incorporate reporting and communications. Regular progress reports to our sponsor and executive leadership will be provided by our project team. Our Chief Diversity and Equity Officer, Joy, will keep our commissioners informed. The project team will engage with exec council, including department directors, commissioner staff, HR execs, and ERG leaders. We will invite the Sheriff's Office, auditors, and county attorney leadership to participate in the exec council engagements. One of the spaces we're most excited about convening is the quarterly equity forum for countywide equity staff. This space will be hosted by ODE, the ERU, the CIU, and Central HR for countywide equity staff, such as the equity managers, ERGs, department equity committee participants. This space will fill some of the purpose of the previous WESP committee to share updates, connection, problem solve, and progress reports along the way. In addition to these convenings, we will have written communications on the progress of the WESP renewal process, including ODE's website having a new page for the WESP renewal, ODE's quarterly newsletter from Joy, Wednesday Wire articles, and board presentations, at least 2. This one here to share our proposed plan, and when we come back with a recommended renewed WESP in November. We're, of course, happy to come back if you'd like additional updates. Next slide, please. Our next steps include taking this presentation on a little roadshow to our other stakeholders that we haven't yet engaged on our proposed plan. We will officially launch with our first quarterly equity forum, and we are working with county comms on a Wednesday Wire article for that launch. Joy will share a newsletter announcement, and we will convene our first WESP Renewal Steering Committee meeting in the coming month. This concludes our slide presentation for today. We're glad we had the slides after all. And we're now open for your questions, comments, or feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I will go to the board for questions. We'll start with Commissioner Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for an excellent presentation. It's an ambitious plan. And I think I caught that the recommendations would be ultimately presented to the Board of Commissioners in November. Is that right? Right.
Correct.
Yes.
And they'll cover a four-year span. And then do you think, is there any point at which you might receive input that's anonymous? I'm curious because some of these matters are pretty sensitive and, what would you do if that happened?
Yeah, so within our communications flow, we're hoping to have specific engagements with stakeholders, but also working on designing a internal public comment period, as well. So with the work of the committees can be reviewed by staff in general and provide comments, and we can make those anonymous as well. So that the communications flow and that feedback can then flow back to the work groups and through the steering committee and through the structure, so that we can incorporate feedback from any staff who would want to provide feedback.
Thank you. And then I wasn't clear, so the public involvement, I get the stakeholder piece, but is there going to be an opportunity for individual members of the public to present their experience or have any input? Is there any part of this where that would be an opportunity?
Yeah, so we're planning on engaging our community stakeholders, our community organization stakeholders, through our West Governance Committee. But we can definitely design a process to include the public as well. So we're trying to answer a lot of questions regarding how our community stakeholders weigh in on the process. But that we're definitely open to that, and there's flexibility in the plan to be able to create it.
LA, can you share a little bit? In our last process, we had some outside organizations participate with us.
Yes, we previously had members of our West Committee who were from our local nonprofits who participated in the West Committee. But those, as we learned some lessons from the previous West, we were trying to make sure that their engagement and how we include them we're trying to be more careful how we include them. We want to make sure that we can incorporate their feedback. So we're going to put all of those questions in that governance structure and inviting them to participate so that we can actually address their concerns.
And I believe you also heard them mention that there will be placement on ODE's website, which is public as well.
Great. Yeah, I wondered about how people would know this opportunity was available. Well, that sounds great. I think I'll be looking forward to seeing how it develops and seeing the recommendations.
Great, thank you so much. Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize for being late. There was an auto accident. Thank you so much for this report. I'm really excited to see this being picked up in such a committed way. So thank you all. And I'm just wondering, this is kind of a renewal of were we able to salvage any of the work thus far? And how have you been able to use whatever work you may have been able to salvage up to this point to inform where we go now?
Yeah. So the original WES actually created that infrastructure, but also we made significant progress in implementing the recommendations. However, if we look at the process evaluation, there's still some yellows and there's still some reds in some of the department's ability to be able to complete those recommendations, and those had to do with structural questions, right? With whose responsibility it was. Was it central HR or was it a departmental HR? And so we want to bring people together and revisit those as well. So as part of our research phase, we're looking at the recommendations from the previous WES and seeing which ones still need some support and guidance to implement. But with those recommendations also came more questions. As we develop processes, there were a lot of issues that arose from those as well that we want to make sure that we can address throughout this process as well.
Great, thank you. I mean, I think this is great. You've outlined, I think, a very strong plan, and I really appreciate the increased communication that you're planning for. And this is kind of like, this is the what. Like, this is what we need to do. I guess my question, and I know it's a hard question, is the how. Is we know that there has been employee trust broken. We know that there are issues of racism, perceived and real, and all the other challenges that we face. So that's kind of, and I don't know if you can answer that, but maybe you can try.
Yeah, so I previously, before I was a workforce equity manager, I worked with organizational learning, and I was an equity trainer and conflict resolution specialist. And so much of the way that we're designing it is to bring people to the table and negotiate with each other around these issues. One of the challenges previously was that the West Committee was about 100 people, and we brought everyone to the table, and it was difficult to manage the work and the discussions that came from that. So we're recruiting our staff and other equity managers and other people who were charged with implementing the West to help, serve as liaisons with staff as they work through these questions. And we're definitely going to engage in, trauma-informed processes and being able to have some a structure for conflict resolution, and within those, right? So I think the spirit of this is to make sure that people have those conversations and that we are intentional about how we navigate them and make sure that we can address the concerns, not just the recommendation concerns, but the issues that people have with values or their experiences within the process. I feel that because of the infrastructure that we have, there are a lot more people in the county who are practitioners of equity, who have an equity title, who have those skills that we didn't have when we first initiated the WESP, and I want to make sure that we leverage that.
I appreciate that, Alejandro. And I mean, I know that some people have expressed frustration about how slow this process has been, but as Chair Vega-Peterson knows and my other board members, I mean, there was a time when WESP did not exist, when there was no funding for investigations, and you might have to report to your direct supervisor about something that might have to do with your direct supervisor. So while we have a long ways to go, I am really proud of the work that we've come this far. But and I'm really excited to have your team here and to have Joy leading this effort. And I'm hopeful that we can move more quickly without re-traumatizing more people along the way. And because, as you know, people are like, look, we've had these conversations multiple times, and what comes of it? And now I feel like, okay, we're going to start again. So this time we really got to make sure that we really use this work to move our organization forward. And I know that all of you want to do that and are committed to do that. And I want our staff and our employees to know that I know that this board is committed to that as well, and that we all support you, and we'll do everything that we can to make sure that you have what you need to really make the difference that we set out to make. And when we listen to the employees of color and the different ERGs, 7 years ago, that we did hear them, and we are listening, and we are trying. The other question I had is, so this is going to be a temporary steering committee. So can you kind of talk about like that? So talk about the temporary nature and then what's going to happen.
Yeah, so the part of the reason that the work has moved slowly is that there are a lot of questions on how it functioned previously, and in order to, and at the same time, we have to balance with let's just get started, right? So we do need guidance from a steering committee, and there's so many questions around how the West will operate over the next 4 years that we actually need a governance committee to help us work those things out, so that those questions get answered and that they work for people. So the steering committee in itself is bringing together staff from those those investments. So like the CIU, our office, organizational learning, departmental HR managers, departmental equity managers, those who were intimately involved with implementing it, as well as ERG staff to come in and help us make those decisions. So that's who the work groups will present to be able to move forward. When the plan is finished in November, we anticipate that we will have a lot more guidance on how to operate a West committee for the next 4 years, so that it doesn't fall prey to the same issues that it did before.
Great. Well, I'm really excited and look forward to hearing from y'all in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Myron.
Thank you. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I really appreciate your presentation today. And I just have a couple of questions. I appreciate my fellow commissioners' comments and questions, and particularly Commissioner Stegman and sort of acknowledgement of some of what has gone on in the past and the need to really act and rebuild some of the trust of our employees. And one question I have is, how can the board itself, how can each individual commissioner elevate or increase our engagement in the process to support ODE and our employees in doing this work?
Well, I'm happy to provide a little bit of insight. One of the things you all will notice is that our meeting cadence will definitely look different. It was quarterly in the past, and it's either going to every other month or monthly, because in the case I do meet monthly with one of you. And so it will increase significantly, where I will continue to provide ongoing updates, as well as your staff will have the ability to be engaged with the work that Ale and April are outlining as well in some form or fashion. And then I will be coming regularly to the board staff meetings, where previously they did not get an opportunity to see me as frequently. It will increase as well to provide updates, get questions, and then not only myself, but also my team will be able to come with me as well, so that we can have that interaction and that discussion to be able to give them the opportunity to provide input.
That's great. I really appreciate that. It felt like somewhat of a disconnect in the previous incarnation of the West, where it felt like the board was actually somewhat discouraged from actively participating in the work. And so really excited to have my office, have all of our offices really be true partners in this work. The one other thing that I just wanted to emphasize and ask about is about just within the budget process. Since the WESP was originally passed, and there has been an investment, really, I would say, of untold millions of dollars. And it was difficult to follow because it was all disaggregated. It was in different program offers and different departments, without bringing the whole together and saying, here's how much we are investing. Here's what we're trying to achieve, which is really centering around our employees. And because this is about people, it is about making a difference for the employees. I'm curious how we are connecting our investments to meaningful outcomes, for example, in budget work sessions, to ensure the money we are putting into this is achieving real things for real people.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, first, what I would like to do is to be able to provide you information that I received in 2022 that did outline all of the spending that has happened with the WESP to date. Well, it will be to date, would be in 2022. But I can happily give that to each of you and make sure that you have that information so you understand where all of the resources went, how the funds was spent, and where the funds were allocated. So I'll make sure I do that. And then in terms of the budget, the budgetary process, I know that my team and I, we actually do look at the transmittals to understand where it has been infused. So we have a good understanding, and we work very closely with the budget office to gather that information. And then I do believe, and I will let my team share more, but we do plan on making sure that things that are going forward will be incorporated into the budget process, and we'll have a lot more clearer picture of what that looks like. So Ale or April, would you like to share?
So one of the goals is to tie the WESP to the budget process and then align it within our fiscal year, so that the recommendations build up over the next 4 years, so that it's incremental, but then also prioritized for what the staff are asking for. So that way it provides not just a funding vehicle for any new investments, but also accountability in reporting. Because as the departments or offices have to report or during budget hearings or asking for resources, those things will be public and they will be more consistent. So that's one of the major goals of the plan. April, do you want to? Yeah.
And I just would like to give a shout out, if I may, to the chair, because the way we are presenting this, we got her full support. So that is why the engagement of all of the commissioners is really at the forefront. And so we just thank you for the support in us being able to engage everyone within the organization, not only, employees and staff, but also commissioners and their staff as well. So thank you for that.
Sure. Any other questions, Commissioner Myron?
No, that I really, really appreciate that, and appreciate the chair in giving you that support and that direction. So no, I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. And I just want to say I'm really proud to be the executive sponsor of this work. I think it was a part of the reason I wanted to do this is because I know how important this process is, and getting this process right is for us as an organization and for so many of our employees who really want to make sure their voices are heard, their perspectives are heard, and that they're seeing the action and response from leadership in moving this forward. And I just have so much appreciation for the work that you've already done, and just how proud I am of the work that you've done. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this briefing today, is to have the board and the public as well have the opportunity to know what this is looking like moving forward, how we're on that path to November of 23, where we're going to be getting those recommendations and understanding, the different pieces, the different voices, the different work that's going to be happening in that time. We are starting from a different place as we're looking at this WESP renewal than we were before. We do have, equity managers throughout our departments at the county where we didn't before. We do have new divisions and resources for employees to go to in terms of handling different complaints and situations that come up. We do have organizational learning. I think that has done such great work in terms of resources, and I know that you have been meeting with organizational learning to really even talk about how that can be enhanced. But we still know that there is a lot more work to do, and what we're going to be getting in November is really then, again, the next start. This is really, this is the game plan, right? This is going to be the path that we will be taking over the next 4 years, 5 years to have that second part of the work and really where we're going to be. So I'm very excited about the idea of where we are today, where we're going to be in November, and then where we're going to be in the years past that. So just appreciate all of this so much, and look forward to engaging in this process and getting some updates, and then really hearing about the plan in November. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. We are actually going to be taking about a 5-minute break at this point as we get ready for our next board briefing. So we'll adjourn for 5 minutes and reconvene at 10:45. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we are reconvening the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners Board Briefing. And for our second briefing today, we have our 2023 federal agenda and updates. And we have our mighty government relations team here to lead this presentation. We will also be joined a little bit later with a special guest, and I'll be happy to give some introductory remarks when she gets here. So I will turn it over to you, Justin.
Great. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Justin Black. I'm the Director of Government Relations here at Multnomah County. I use he, him pronouns. And joining me is...
Sherry Campbell. I'm the Senior Grants Coordinator and the Federal Liaison, and I use she, her pronouns.
Great. And today we have a presentation that will be up shortly. But for discussion purposes, we're going to talk about our approach to federal advocacy. We're going to talk about FY22 funding from the feds, as well as our legislative priorities, what we're seeing trending in Congress. And then, as the chair said, we will have a special guest, and also joining us at the end of the presentation will be Vicki Cram, who is our federal lobbyist and is in DC right now, or is always in DC. So next slide. And then next slide. So this is actually the third ever federal agenda for Multnomah County, still relatively new. Thanks to the board in, I think it was 2019 or 2020, we were able to really move forward on bringing on a federal lobbyist, expanding our footprint in federal advocacy, and really start working. And I think our timing was absolutely perfect because it was right before the pandemic as we started seeing an increase in possibilities to receive federal funding for programs here at Multnomah County. So good timing. Our purpose in the federal land is largely around federal investments and trying to bring resources down to the county. We were able to obtain, an earmark for the BHRC. Last time around, we've also received an earmark for Burnside Bridge. I think they were $2 million each. So we've been able to bring down additional resources. And actually, there was a third for resources for the DA. So we've been able to bring down millions of dollars in federal funding. And I will say, largely due to my colleague over here, Sherry, who has built a tremendous relationship locally with our federal delegation, working on everything from constituent issues to hosting issue briefings for congressional staff to help make sure that they are included and aware of what's actually happening at the county level. So thank you, Sherry. We work through you all as the Board of Commissioners. We spend a fair amount of time with our federal delegation. As I said, we also do tours for them, bring them in so they can actually see the day-to-day work of the county and make sure they're aware of everything. We also work with federal agencies such as HUD, USDOT, HHS, and many others to make sure that agency staff is also aware of what's happening here in Multnomah County and how they can be helpful and how we might be able to coordinate or how we might be able to draw down money from them. This is all built on relationships. Our federal lobbyist, Vicki Cram, has tremendous relationships not only with our delegation, but also federal agencies, and has been able to open many doors to us to have these conversations. The relationships that Sherry has built locally has really been tremendous in how we coordinate both a local and a DC approach on making sure that things are happening. And then, working across systems for long-term results. The departments work a lot with federal agencies and also do a level of advocacy that fits into our agenda. So we're really kind of getting at all the levels of advocacy. Next slide. Our federal priorities, I think what you'll see is common themes across the board that will also match much of what our state agenda entails. We often, when we are meeting with other elected officials, we talk about Multnomah County being a safety net provider and payer across many of our services, all the way from the animal shelter to behavioral health to housing and homelessness. We oftentimes are working across many areas of people and pets who are in their most desperate times and providing services to those individuals. So you will see that in the federal agenda. We working on equity across federal programs, making sure that no one is left behind. Protecting and expanding supports for marginalized populations. You'll see that in the agenda, as well as supporting whole communities by coordinating funding across silos. This is oftentimes an issue between state funding and federal funding, is they like to fund very specific things that often don't capture the whole picture. So we work to broaden understanding of how funding works, and then work with our departments on how they braid a lot of that funding back in. And then, of course, encouraging innovation and collaboration in response to local issues and strengths. Federal priorities. Now we'll get into the meat of it. Reducing homelessness and improving housing resources, of course, is top of line for both the state agenda and the federal agenda. You're looking to expand investments specifically around housing vouchers in our community. We've had some great conversations with HUD and USICH, the U.S. Inter-Council on Homelessness. I can't remember what the whole... Yes, interagency on homelessness, but to really look at how we can get more support from our U.S. agencies and bringing down not only funds, but technical support to make all of that work. And then focusing on the intersection of homelessness and behavioral health and criminal justice on all those things. As we look at conversations we've had with Senator Wyden's office around his recent $1 billion investment in crisis intervention at the Medicaid level and trying to find ways that we may be able to take advantage of that. We're still working through that. I will say all of this work with agencies is not quick. It is not easy. It is often mired in a lot of technical rules and regulations at the federal level, but we continue to work around that. Expanding access to health and behavioral health services. This is where, working for long-term access to Medicaid, we submitted comments on the 1115 waiver that Oregon got around its Medicaid waiver to ensure that people were enrolled in Medicaid longer. So now there's a 2-year. Once you qualify for Medicaid, you're now going to have a 2-year window of being eligible for Medicaid services, which is really helpful instead of having to renew every year. Fully funding public health infrastructure and planning. As we've all seen in the last couple of years, public health matters, and really both at the state and the federal level, making sure that we remind agencies in the delegation about that just because the pandemic is in its downswing, there are many things that public health does, and having that infrastructure available during crises like this is incredibly important. Increasing funding to address behavioral health needs. I talked about the Wyden crisis money, but in reality, the amount of federal funding that the county receives for behavioral health is very tiny. It is largely done through grants, also in Sherry's department, but it's very small chunks of money. So we continue to advocate for real investment at the federal level in behavioral health, so that we can help provide services to those most in need, and then supporting workforce training, retention, and expansion. And I know our special guest is going to talk about this a little bit, but I think we've had a lot of great conversations around doing this and getting support at the federal level on expanding our workforce, because that is something that we are seeing in every avenue: behavioral health, housing, all those important areas. The workforce needs are just huge, and trying to get enough people into the pipeline so that we can have a ready workforce that is ready to go.
And now it's my turn. Can we move forward on the slide to the next one? There, thank you. one of our next top line, priorities is to protect and expand supports for vulnerable populations. And this clearly is woven in with everything that Justin's just been talking about and the county's unique role as the safety net provider. And I think one of the things that is so clear when I look at the federal supports for our residents and the folks that we serve is that the foundation of that support are federal entitlements and the safety net services they provide, things like SNAP, TANF, WIC, and those sorts of things. And without that kind of support, the work we do won't have a foundation. And it's clear that some of those things, all of them, but some more than others, are at risk right now. And there's a lot of national conversation about how to distribute those funds and who to provide them to. So continuing to to work with our delegation, all of whom are supportive of these issues just like we are, but without that kind of federal partnership, the work we do here at the county would be very difficult, if not impossible. Also, one of the things that I know it's come up several times is the child tax credit. We know that reduced child poverty. It went away. There was an effort at the end of last year to reinstate it, and while the potential for that might be limited right now, we want to keep that on the table as something that we know, we have the data to show made a difference in the lives of children and families. And then we want to just keep broadband access. There's been a lot of federal funding given to that. Much of it is going to rural areas, and the way the feds look at rural Multnomah County is not. And yet we still know that disproportionately low-income communities and communities of color have lower access to broadband, and that is a basic need they have in order, particularly children and students, to have access. So we want to kind of keep our eyes on that and continuing to advocate for not just building out the infrastructure, but also making sure that there are supports for families to be able to access broadband.
And I will, just to add a little point on that. So I think this is where, the integration of our state agenda and our federal agenda are really clear in the broadband space because, as we look at access to broadband around not just rural communities, but underserved communities that aren't able to access broadband but are in an urban setting, this is where we work with the state broadband office to bring and raise those issues up because most of this broadband funding actually funnels through the state. So it's important that both as we advocate at the federal level around their rules around the money, that we also advocate at the state level to make sure that the state is bringing up these same issues. So there is just a lot of, for lack of a better word, synergy between, our state advocacy and our federal advocacy around a lot of issues. And broadband is just one of the easiest ones to call out.
True that. And then we want to pivot to the public safety system. And I think one of the things that really struck me when I was updating our agenda, our federal agenda this year, is that we continue to have one of the most progressive and exciting public safety partnerships in the country. And yet, like most cities, but we have been hit really hard with, the after effects of the pandemic and the increased violence and the break in community trust around whether or not we can manage the increase in crime and trust in our public safety system. And so what we're looking for is kind of funding that can support both, kind of move forward, the progressive processes and programs that we have that strengthen neighborhoods, which we know is the long-term way to address public safety issues, while also providing funds to help kind of stabilize the increase in violence and, providing the kind of support we need to be able to do both at the same time instead of asking for an either or. Also, survivors of crime. Right now, there's so many survivors, and frankly, some of them are, folks that may have been a perpetrator in a previous crime. And it gets back to being able to flood neighborhoods and people with services to help bring them back to kind of where they feel stabilized and supported in their own communities, and also safe. And so, kind of looking at making sure that we can kind of have the funding and the support and, frankly, the policies in place to be able to support them. And then this is an ongoing, I'm looking forward to the day we have a federal agenda where we're not asking for being able to use Medicaid for those housed in county jails. I keep seeing it pop up. There was legislation couple years ago to change that. It didn't pass. But we have a really unique situation here in the county where we also do, as you know, a huge budget to provide care to folks in our county jails. And the other interesting piece of not being able to use Medicaid in the jails is that it really it hampers the ability to do a smooth transition once they're released. So it not only costs the county a lot of money, it costs the community a lot because we're not able to move people into the community services with their benefits intact. So.
Just to continue to add on this, so I think it's important to note that we advocated for this in the Oregon Medicaid 1115 waiver that was recently approved. The state and the feds actually made a decision to table it, but both have indicated that it is an ongoing conversation. So we continue to advocate at the state and the federal level to include this coverage. Most likely, what we are hearing is that they're going to follow California's model, which is a 60-day continuous coverage, so that an individual who is in jail less than 60 days will continue their coverage. And then folks who are in jail for longer than 60 days, their coverage will begin 60 days before they are released from jail, so that CCO can come in and start coordinating their care so that the day they leave, they will be able to have appointments and to get their needs met as soon as they leave, as long as they're Medicaid eligible.
Thank you. Again, state, federal. Next slide, please. So this next one, support capacity for effective tribal consultation. This is a new one, and frankly was an aha for me. As you know, we have a new federal liaison on the GR team, and in conversations with Anna, what became really clear, and I see this in grants, I know we're seeing it at the state level as well, where everybody wants to be able to demonstrate that they are interacting and collaborating with the tribes. And that is actually required by several of the grants that the state releases. And I myself have been in conversations with tribes in order to fulfill that grant requirement, which is not a great reason to collaborate, but it is one. But what Anna has pointed out is that tribes are not funded to be collaborating jurisdictions, and many of them are very small. And so what's happened is that she was telling me that there was one tribe that had over 1,000 requests for letters of support, and they just don't have the infrastructure for that. And so what we're realizing is that the tribes need to be funded to be able to participate in the kind of collaborations and cross-jurisdictional activities that are being advocated for both at the federal and the state level. So and this is kind of something I haven't even brought up to our delegations yet because it's such a new realization for us, but it's a real barrier for both being able to, get all the check marks on a grant, but also, frankly, for creating collaborative and effective programming with particularly in Multnomah County, where we have so many tribal residents. And dismantling systemic racism. This is, again, woven throughout all of our priorities. But we're excited to say, and that there's been an executive order as soon as President Biden was inaugurated. He did an executive order, and he updated that in 2023, really outlining how the federal government was going to address racism. And that's great. We think that's great, and we want to kind of keep pushing that to make sure that with all the things that are going on, it continues to be woven into federal policy and legislation. There are several bills that were passed in the last session that did exactly that. And so we're really encouraged by that, but it's kind of one of those things where we know historically that if you stop looking at that and prioritizing it, it's easy to slip back into, kind of going with the easiest funding modality. So we want to keep that, our eyes on that. We want to keep working to both integrate it into our programs and holding the feds, accountable for doing what they said they were going to do as time goes on. All right. And the next one, again, improving resilience. And resilience is one of those words that, can mean everything, again, is woven into virtually all of our priorities. Specifically, obviously, right now, our focus is on the Burnside Bridge. That is a classic resilience, and we will continue focusing on that. It's not news to you that when we're done focusing on that, we'll have other resilience projects that we need to undertake. So we can't, it's very expensive, and the infrastructure bills that have passed are great, but they're not going to be enough. And we've seen that with the releases of this. It's the biggest investment in our lifetime, and it's just a drop in the bucket for what's really needed. So kind of maintaining that as a priority. And then the resilience hubs, which is an exciting and very different spin on resilience, because it's both infrastructure, but it's also people. And I know there's some really exciting things happening right now around supporting our residents in preparing, both, physically, what do you put in your shed, and also kind of, how do you come together as a community to be resilient. So we want to be able to be supporting both of those simultaneously and together. And finally, climate action. There's a very long list of things, very specifics that we are focusing on. None of you will be surprised that I've been working really closely with John Washutinsky on that, and he has many ideas of what we can be doing. But basically, it's really, again, focusing on environmental justice, keeping our eyes on the disproportionate impacts that have happened in our marginalized communities, and how whenever you take on a project, if you're not taking that into consideration, it's easy to slip back into the easy path and the more traditional path of not focusing those funds on environmental justice. And also ensuring that those communities not just get funding, but they also enjoy the economic benefits of those projects. It's kind of a unique spin while this work is going and there's so much energy around it, is for us to kind of keep it very consistent with our values. And so that's kind of an overview of a much longer document that I know you've all had an opportunity to review, but if there's any other questions about that, I'm always available to talk. I wanted to pivot for a minute, and this is a really quick overview about kind of the federal funding. I think there's always this sense that there's so much federal money out there, and how do we get more? And that is one of the things we're always working on. But a quick snapshot in fiscal year of 22, we had $59 million of what I look at as appropriated program specific. So it's both formula and competitive grants. I won't get into a lot of detail about what that means, but those would be federal funds that are really specific to very specific programs that we receive, and we do what we've promised to do with those funds. So that was $59 million last year. Then we get about $100 million in Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements. Those are not grants, those are fees. It's hard to count because of the different programs it goes into, but it's a substantial investment, federal investment in the programs we run. And then the thing that skews everything for the last couple years are the COVID funds. In fiscal year 22, we had $177 million. And what's really interesting is looking at, and I see this in my grant role, kind of skewing everything to really focus on COVID funds. And as those start to reduce, kind of re-looking to kind of refocus on, a normal federal funding stream. But in FY22, we got $336 million from the federal government, which is a lot of money. It's also nothing compared to what you all budget and support the county through. So it's kind of braiding those funds together and figuring out. And one of the things that's in the agenda is, the specific programs that receive $500,000 or more, and there's a lot of ways we can slice and dice this. And finally, what I try and do, because it seems like our federal funds have gone down, but when I look at and strip out COVID funds and those sorts of things, it's actually quite flat, which surprised me, particularly since we've moved over the last 5 years. We moved out of the Trump years where we were losing grants or at least opportunities because of some of the kind of policies that were coming down from the federal government. But it has really, our program funding has remained pretty level during that time. And I think that shows kind of that the agencies are really continuing to do their work, and we have opportunities to increase and decrease in certain programs, but that generally we can anticipate that it's about that much money. The future potential for increased funding is really through some of the legislation that passed last year, particularly the infrastructure bill, the IRA, where the government is really looking at building out additional large projects. I can assure you we're already having these conversations. You've seen some of those grants come before you, and there will be a lot more. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of jurisdictions that have been waiting for this money for a very long time. So I think we're very well positioned, but it's a really competitive environment. But we will be pursuing those in any way we can, and we're working on it now. So.
Great. Thank you, Sherry. So now the third panelist of us, Vicki Cram, who is joining us all the way from Washington, D.C., will give her perspective on our work with federal agencies and the delegation. So hopefully there she is. And Vicki Cram, everybody.
Welcome, Vicki.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see and hear me.
Yes, we can see and hear you just fine.
Perfect. So I'm Vicki Cram. I use she, her pronouns. I am the chair of the Transportation Infrastructure and Local Government Practice at Squire Patton Boggs in Washington, D.C. And it is my honor to work for the county here in Washington and with the wonderful team of Justin and Sherry, who are just simply fantastic. I'm going to speak for a few minutes about federal funding opportunities as sort of a perfect segue from what Sherry was talking about for the county arising from the legislation that was passed in the last Congress. One is the bipartisan infrastructure law known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, and the other is the landmark climate law, the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. And these two huge bills will push a lot of funding out into local communities and into ours. One of the county's top infrastructure priorities, as we saw in the presentation, is the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge. Last year, the county received $6 million in federal funding for the Burnside Bridge from congressionally directed spending and a planning grant from US DOT. There are two funding opportunities that are coming up as part of the IIJA, which are the Bridge Investment Program and the Infra Mega Program. The latter can provide significant funding up to $100 million or more for a project. It is a competitive program and there is huge unmet need nationally, but we've laid the groundwork with USDOT over the past couple of years and will submit a very competitive application to them when the NOFO opens up, which should happen in the next month. And of course, recently, Chair Vega Peterson met with USDOT on the bridge issue when she was in Washington, D.C. for the annual National Association of Counties meeting. With the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, the Department of Energy has reorganized. In addition to its traditional roles as an energy research organization through the national labs or in the defense arena, they now have a new Office of State and Community Energy Programs, which will provide competitive funding opportunities to accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies and catalyze local economic development. This office also provides funding for career skills training programs to help prepare workers for the new energy economy. The IRA provides many tax credits for things like converting fleets to electric vehicles or for energy production, say out of solar panels on, let's say, public buildings, for example. Because local governments are not taxed, the IRA provides a direct payment mechanism to provide funding in lieu of a tax credit. The Treasury Department will be coming out with guidance on how this will work in the next month or so, and we look forward to learning more about this new concept and its application for the county. The IRA also authorized a greenhouse gas reduction fund, which includes $20 billion to establish a competitive grant program to support projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through partnerships with either the private sector or in community-led initiatives. And $8 billion of the $20 billion is reserved for projects in low-income and disadvantaged communities. So we will be looking towards this funding as well. Finally, we will continue to work diligently to provide additional federal funding to address behavioral health and homelessness. As part of that effort, representatives of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness came to Portland recently to tour facilities, meet key stakeholders, learn about our challenges, and experience our region's innovative solutions to homelessness. Further, Chair Vega Peterson met with the representatives of the Department of Housing and Urban Development when she was in Washington, D.C., to advocate for funding and creative solutions to address the issues of affordable housing and homelessness. That's just a quick summary of some of the work that we've been doing and some of the funding we look to bring back to the county in the coming year. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Vicki. So that concludes our presentation today. I think this is on the board agenda for Thursday for final adoption of the agenda.
Well, thank you, Justin. Thank you, Sherry, and thank you so much, Vicki, for the presentation and for the updates. Vicki, it's really wonderful having you in DC, keeping Multnomah County's interests, and you're always so helpful when we come out and visit and make sure that we're getting a chance to meet with the folks in DC that we need to. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions and comments from the board, and we'll start with Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Justin and Sherry. And Vicki, it's great to see you. I don't really have a lot of questions other than just one. Obviously, we've been hearing a lot about the SNAP reduction, and I'm really concerned. I mean, as we all know, there was an increase in food benefits during the pandemic, and those benefits are going to go away. I think they've already gone away. And so I'm just wondering, either at a federal or state or county level, what is our plan? How are we going to try to, because we all know, I mean, the pandemic just exacerbated those needs, and those needs have not subsided. In fact, they're probably more needed maybe than during COVID. So I'm just wondering if you have any magical something in your back pocket that we can use to shore up that deficit.
So I do think there's a couple things there. I think, and I think DCHS is probably more adept at talking about kind of on the ground what's working. But I think from the advocacy standpoint, we've been advocating at the state level for either the state to, pick up some of that tab or also do a better job of communicating to individuals who are on SNAP to make sure that they're aware of the benefit change so that they can prepare and manage it. And then, as part of our federal agenda, we are always advocating to expand programs. I think Vicki might be able to talk more about the appetite of expanding SNAP at the federal level, but, we continue to advocate for that. So Vicki, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure, I'm happy to. This year, Congress needs to reauthorize the Farm Bill. It expires by September. And so the Farm Bill is an interesting amalgam of benefits to farmers and then also nutrition programs. And so it attracts a wide array of people who come together who may not always agree on things to reauthorize this huge program. So I don't think, given the current climate that we're in and that the House of Representatives being controlled by Republicans and the Senate having such a small margin, and a divided Congress, that we're going to see an increase in SNAP benefits. But we know that they will be reauthorized, and we know that there is a strong community pushing for their reauthorization and for continued funding. But I think the loss of the benefits is probably not going to be replenished anytime soon.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Vicki. I'm very excited to hear about the 1115 waiver. Justin, you mentioned about maybe we might follow suit as to what California is doing, so that's very exciting. And also appreciated, Sherry, you talking about the funding tribes for, to increase collaboration. And, I think that's what we always, as government, we overlook, like, okay, we can just ask an entity, a nonprofit, a CBO, to do something without ever asking, do they have the capacity? Do they have the funding? So I'm really excited to see us paying attention to that. So hopefully we'll be the recipient of some funding from the IIJA and the IRA. So I know that you're working hard on that, Sherry, and you always do such a great job to pull in as much money to the county as possible. So thank you all for your work. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Rosenbaum.
Thank you. So I know you talked about the ARPA funds that are going to go away, but I didn't hear anything about the discussion over the spending limit, the debt ceiling. I mean, is that affecting budget asks? I assume, so there's a lot of talk about cuts in order to deal with that. How is that affecting your work?
Yeah, so I think I may just punt that right to Vicki because I think she's probably more immersed in that conversation.
Thank you, Justin. It's a conversation that's ongoing here in Washington, D.C., and is obviously the big elephant in the room. They anticipate that the debt ceiling will need to be raised around about June, sort of depending on what tax revenues come in after April 15th. There are extraordinary measures that the Treasury Department is currently going through to extend the payment of our debts. Conversations are having at a local, at a sort of middle of the road level between Democrats and Republicans. But right now, some of the problem solver caucus actually been getting together and trying to figure out how to come together. But right now, the formal stance of Speaker McCarthy is that they want a number of different cuts to be made, including entitlement programs. That is a complete non-starter for most Democrats, and other things where maybe there might be a little bit of room for agreement. So they have proposed a number of cuts and other programs that they want to see happen in return for raising the debt ceiling, for voting for that. The president is very staunchly saying that there's going to be no deal and that Congress just needs to step up and raise the debt ceiling. So that's where they are officially. There's some back channels talking between moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats, as I said, but the two key players here, who are Speaker McCarthy and the president, are on opposite ends of the spectrum right now. And it's sort of a big game of chicken for a while until we get closer to the June date.
Yeah, I mean, it's concerning because obviously it sounds like a lot of stalemate in the back. I mean, that's the background against which we're making these requests, and a lot of our programs are probably also on the chopping block.
I will say one of the things that we identified early in this agenda is that, with Congress being split and such close margins, that we don't have high hope for huge funding increases from Congress. So that's why we've really ramped up that engagement at the agency level to take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the IIJA, and to see where there are other places that we can find, either funding or technical assistance from agencies. So it's really kind of, we do this with every agenda as we kind of look at the current makeup of what Congress looks like and what the executive branch looks like to see where our opportunities are. And to be honest, we're not seeing a ton of opportunities in Congress in a big scale, maybe a couple small things, but the real opportunity there is at the agency level and working directly with staff there.
Right. Yeah. No, I think the agenda looks great, and particularly the emphasis on vulnerable populations. Hopefully, a lot of that will still be able to happen. So, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know Commissioner Myron had to leave at 11:30. Is she still on? Okay. All right, great. Well, I appreciate this presentation a lot, and just wanted to check in. I know that we've had a lot of conversations about the opportunities that are available for the Earthquake Ready Burnside Bridge and having the conversations with US DOT. And I know one of the things that they recommended is that we really work with our federal delegation to ask that seismic, for instance, be included in some of those, some of the language that they're doing in terms of like how the administration needs to prioritize, decisions around transportation projects, which I found incredibly helpful. And I think that's one of the reasons why meeting directly with some of the federal agencies, gives us the ability of how we can best advocate for ourselves with our own federal delegation and the roles that they have. And, Vicki, I'm curious, as we're looking at things, around housing and homelessness, around, working on some of the healthcare things, if there are other of those pieces where it's going to be important for us to do the advocating at the federal, with our federal delegation. And we're doing this in kind of the ramp up of having a Congresswoman here in a second. But just, what we, in our role as the elected representatives of Multnomah County, can really best advocate.
Yes, well, I think one of the things that is super helpful is when you do come back to Washington, D.C. I mean, I know we can always meet like this virtually, but to have you come and do the rounds with the federal agencies and make those personal connections is always very helpful. And doing that in advance of our submitting any kind of grants, where we can paint a larger picture for them, because once we've submitted a grant application, whether it be for housing or for transportation or at EPA or for the Department of Energy, for them to have that larger context of the sort of situation that the whole county and what we're working towards. And this one particular grant fits in how it fits into the big picture.
Thank you. And I just got to note that Commissioner Myron is still on. So we'll, Commissioner Myron, if you can come off mute. I don't know if we still have your camera or not, but we're happy to have you ask questions.
I don't see her in the meeting.
She may just be listening in. She's not on an attendee list anywhere?
No.
Okay. Well, we'll find out. We'll make sure that if Commissioner Myron has any questions, we will we'll get those answered for her. With that, I'm going to go ahead and invite our special guest up to the panel. Welcome, Congresswoman Bonamici. It is wonderful to have you join us today. I am thrilled that you're here to spend some time with us this morning as we're talking about our important federal agenda for Multnomah County. It is great to have you here. I've enjoyed working with you personally so much over the past several years, whether it is on issues of workforce and labor, whether it's the importance of investing in childcare, whether it's the importance of the priorities that we have in Multnomah County around behavioral health and homelessness, and you've always been such a champion for education. And so I'm so glad that you are here today, because we know that this partnership between local government and our federal electeds is really critical to making sure that the investments that we're doing here, that the work that's happening at the federal level that is so important to the outcomes that we see here, that we're working in such good partnership with that. I'm going to read a short bio for you, so don't get too embarrassed. I know how that goes, but I just really am glad and proud to have you joining us today. Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici represents the 1st Congressional District of Oregon, which includes large portions of Washington and Multnomah counties, a larger part of Multnomah County now than before, as well as Tillamook, Clatsop, and Columbia counties. In Congress, she is a leader on the Education and the Workforce Committees and the ranking member of the Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education Subcommittee. Congresswoman Bonamici fights to help working families get ahead and to build an economy that gives everyone opportunities to succeed. She supports paid family leave, raising the federal minimum wage, making sure workers have a voice on the job, and workforce development programs. The Congresswoman was honored to serve on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis and is continuing her work to implement the Climate Action Plan, take immediate action to reduce emissions, create good-paying jobs, support a just transition, and strengthen the resilience of our communities. Welcome, Congresswoman Bonamici, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Chair. One thing that was missing from the bio is my former employment by now Commissioner Rosenbaum. So it's nice to see you, boss. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss our shared priorities. And I'm also very excited about having more of Multnomah County in the 1st Congressional District. It is now 23% of the district rather than 8%. So I'm really excited about that. And including this building is in the 1st Congressional District. So I'm excited. Appreciate your commitment to finding collaborative solutions to addressing the challenges that are facing this region. So I'll provide an update on some of the work in Congress and look forward to a conversation. We do have quite a bit to celebrate, particularly from the last Congress. There are several pieces of legislation that are already sending resources to Oregon, including the Inflation Reduction Act. That is funding for people and families. Healthcare is more affordable, a lot of jobs, some action on the climate crisis. The CHIPS and Science Act. Historic investments in domestic manufacturing, increasing opportunities for workers to access good-paying jobs. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. I was very excited about that because we talked about passing an infrastructure package every week, practically every month and year in my decade in Congress, and we finally got it done. So this is a significant commitment to building a more connected and resilient nation. We also took an important step on gun violence prevention when we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which President Biden signed into law. So even in a divided Congress and a divided country, I'm hopeful that we can build on some of those successes. And I have seen sort of an appetite in many areas for some bipartisan work. For example, I've already introduced bipartisan legislation to boost WIC benefits for women, infants, and children, to help educators access mental health support, ocean health. I work on a lot of ocean issues as co-chair of the Congressional Oceans Caucus, and broadband, which we're having a conversation about tomorrow. So a few things that are at top of mind for this upcoming year. Housing and homelessness. And we know we've been, Madam Chair, in many discussions about this. We need to do more to keep people in homes, to provide housing for people experiencing homelessness, and to address public safety concerns. So I do appreciate the conversations we've had to date and look forward to working together on this issue, which will require everyone, federal, state, local, public, private, to solve. At the federal level, I've been focused on robust funding for affordable housing, services to protect and support people experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. I'm honored to be the co-chair of the newly reformed Congressional Caucus on Homelessness, where we're convening colleagues who are truly committed to making a difference, including my colleague, Congresswoman Cori Bush with lived experience, who's one of our co-chairs. We're working together to fully fund programs that provide services to people experiencing homelessness. And I've also led the effort with more than 100 members of Congress to call for expanding emergency rent assistance and other essential programs. We do need resources. We need more housing, more services, and there's some workforce issues there, which we all know about. But we did make advancing housing projects a priority and selecting community project funding, formerly known as earmarks projects this year, and we intend to continue that. I've been promoting effective programs in Oregon and looking at things like the success of Project Turnkey, expanding Section 8 vouchers. I just, as an excuse for my tardiness, was with VA Secretary McDonough, who talked about the significant progress we're making in housing veterans. Mental and behavioral health. We had a great conversation yesterday, and we will continue those conversations because I hear about behavioral health needs in every corner of the district I'm honored to represent, and that includes not only urban issues, but suburban and rural as well. The needs vary, but it's clear that the system is broken. We've heard heartbreaking stories from those who have struggled with addiction, who were ready for help but were turned away because we just don't have enough treatment options. Care workers are burnout and overworked, in harm's way, and underpaid. So we've taken some steps, but there's more to do. Reducing barriers to prescribing medication-assisted treatment, which is a significant step. A variety of loan repayment programs to sort of ease the path into this very important field. But we know we need to better coordinate and resource the entire system and get people the help and support they need. I've been inspired by the county's long-held priority to increase access to low barrier services, and I was pleased to help secure funding for the Multnomah County Behavioral Health Resource Center. Look forward to seeing all that it is accomplishing. I understand there's been some temporary challenges, but we'll continue to advocate for resources and support for its ongoing work. I know one of the issues that is frequently mentioned is the need for Medicaid availability for those who are housed in our jails. My colleague, Annie Custer from New Hampshire, leads those efforts, and I will once again sign on to her legislation to fix that gaping hole in the healthcare for people who are incarcerated. You mentioned my passion for education. I spent years of advocacy as a not only public school parent, but as a member of boards of nonprofit organizations with a focus on education. I will keep fighting for every student to have access to a well-rounded public school curriculum and education. Unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been, instead of focusing on what we should be doing, following the lead of many state legislatures, and the House just recently passed over my stringent objection, something they called the Parents' Bill of Rights, but it is actually more of a blueprint for parents to micromanage educators, restrict curriculum, and ban books. Fortunately, it's not going anywhere in the Senate. As you mentioned, the ranking member, the top Democrat on the subcommittee on early childhood education, elementary and secondary education, I know that our public schools and our students do better when parents are meaningfully involved and have productive collaborative relationships with educators. So I led the Democratic alternative to that proposal that has now, and we now have a resolution that I drafted that is supported by more than 250 education and civil rights organizations, including the National PTA and the Oregon PTA. And that's the Bill of Rights for Students and Parents that provides an affirmative and inclusive vision for public education rooted in 5 pillars: well-rounded education, authentic parental involvement, responsive and inclusive public schools, student civil rights, and democracy. So we also expect to be voting soon on discriminatory and harmful legislation designed to ban transgender girls from playing in sports. Schools are genuinely safer when students feel included and are accepted and cared for, and excluding vulnerable students from school programs accomplishes the opposite. So I will be fighting that legislation as well. Workforce. Big issue, and it comes up in many contexts. I'm now honored to serve as the co-chair of the bipartisan CTE, Career and Technical Education Caucus, and the bipartisan Apprenticeship Caucus. I'm very interested in how we can get more Oregonians on a path to a good paying job. And it's a priority in Congress. I want to note that it's truly an honor to have our former BOLI Commissioner of Bureau of Labor and Industries, now Congresswoman Val Hoyle, as a colleague who has been a leader in these workforce and apprenticeship issues as well. One of the steps that's important is to strengthen industry and sector partnerships with higher education. And we know at the high school level, CTE programs can prepare students for a range of careers, and that hands-on learning is really engaging for them. So registered apprenticeships provide workers with opportunities to learn while they earn in safe, supportive workplaces with good pay when seeking full-time employment. I appreciate Multnomah County's commitment to apprenticeship hours on county projects and in exceeding goals for bringing women and apprentices of color to these job sites. Multnomah County has been a leader. Whenever I can, give a shout out to Oregon tradeswomen as well, because they're doing such great work in that area. I understand that American Rescue Plan dollars were critical to workforce development boards to connect workers with employers. And last Congress, we almost got 2 critical workforce laws across the finish line. The House passed an update to the Bipartisan National Apprenticeship Act, which has not been updated since the 1930s. You heard that right. In the 1930s. We also passed in the House the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We passed it in the Education Committee, but couldn't get it through the House. But we won't stop working on it because we know our workforce depends on finding bipartisan consensus to get these laws into effect that will help at the state and county level. Childcare. Madam Chair, I know this is a key issue for you, for the county, for our families, and for our economy. I look at childcare as basic infrastructure. Parents, primarily moms, are often forced out of the workforce, and families are struggling to pay, and providers are on the brink. So we must pay childcare and early childhood education workers a living wage. It is valuable work, and it is a good investment, and it's also a matter of equity. Now, most childcare workers are women, and overwhelmingly women of color. So fixing this crisis, like so many, involve a coordinated response. I applaud the county's Preschool for All initiative. It's an example of what we can do to work together to get this done. We did make some progress in Congress. I preferred the Build Back Better provisions regarding care, but we did make some progress, and I'll continue to build on that momentum. Nearly 150 of our colleagues have joined me in advocating to double funding for the Child Care and Development Block Grant. That would be a great success and make a difference. This is important funding that can help families afford child care, but now only reaches a fraction of the kids who are eligible. I know President Biden's budget follows through on my request to include universal preschool and transformative investment in the care economy and expanding effective programs like Head Start. So we're working to reintroduce my Build Housing with Care Act to co-locate affordable housing and childcare. I also want to mention just a couple other issues that are important. Climate change, as you noted. I did serve on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis for 4 years. We drafted a comprehensive science-based climate action plan. And I also want to note on climate that we have made some progress in the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, on which I serve as a senior member. And surprisingly, many of those bills are bipartisan, and I'm proud of that work. So I note that the county's federal agenda and mine reflect many of these priorities, and I know meaningful action will take investment and collaboration, and I'm honored to be your partner in Congress, and I look forward to working together, especially on these critical issues like housing, homelessness, behavioral health, building an earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge, and so much more. And I believe I have time for questions, is that right?
We would be glad if you had time for questions. So I'll go ahead and turn over to Commissioner Rosenbaum. And I will say that Commissioner Myron had dialed in and so was listening, but and we're not able to have her speak, but she has been listening and wanted to let you know
Terrific,
that.
thank you.
Commissioner Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, great to see you. The Congresswoman and I have worked together for many years and been friends for at least as long as that. And so thank you for all of your excellent work on everything that the county cares about and so much more too. I'm really outstanding. And it's great that you have more of Multnomah County now in your district. I know I had friends who would call me up and say, why is Suzanne Bonamici on my ballot? And I thought I was in Earl Blumenauer's district. So yeah, I was glad to be able to tell them why that is.
Every 10 years, the lines change.
Yeah. absolutely. So I didn't hear you mention the child tax credit at all. Is there any hope, do you think, for that?
Well, that's interesting. Thank you, Commissioner Rosenbaum, because I was thinking about it as I was speaking, but neglected to mention the importance of the child tax credit, which, as you know, made significant reductions to child poverty in a very short period of time and very effective. Unfortunately, it sunsetted, but there is an ongoing effort to renew that. Most of that work, because it's a tax credit, happens in the Ways and Means Committee, but my voice is there, as well as colleagues like Congressman Blumenauer, who serves on that committee. We know the importance of that. We know what a difference it made, so we'll continue to work on it. It is, try to be diplomatic here, more challenging, obviously, in this Congress, not being in the majority, so not deciding what issues go to the floor. But something like that makes, I mean, this is not a red or blue issue. There are children who are struggling in families that are struggling in every single corner of the state and country. And so we should be able to come together on such a proven, effective program. So we'll continue to work on that as well.
Great. And then before you got here, we were talking a lot about just funding requests and how those would be affected by the debt ceiling discussion. It seems like that's a backdrop that makes a lot of things difficult. And then all this discussion about cuts, which include a lot of our programs as well. So I don't know if you have any insight for us on how we can be helpful or just...
I appreciate the question, Commissioner. I wish I had a working crystal ball to know how this will all play out. I do know that we keep sending the message that the debt ceiling is not about additional spending. It's about the authority to pay the bills that have already been incurred. And if we want to have a conversation about how we can, find smarter, better ways to do things with resources, then I'm more than willing to have that conversation, but it belongs in the budget and appropriations context, not in the context of the debt ceiling. And I also note that the debt ceiling was raised 3 times during the previous administration by colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Who didn't blink. And so I'm concerned, obviously, because of some of the threats that have been made, and because we still don't know the extent to which the current speaker negotiated to get the votes he needed on the 15th try to become speaker. We don't know how that is going to play out in terms of this negotiation on the debt ceiling. I know President Biden put his budget out and said, okay, let's talk. And so far they're kind of off to a rocky start, but please know that we take this issue very, very seriously, including raising the debt ceiling and looking at cuts to programs that matter so much. It seems pretty clear from the conversation that happened on the House floor during the President's State of the Union address that cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are off the table. We're waiting for the majority party to tell us what they want to cut, but so far they haven't really done that.
Yeah, it's troubling. And finally, it's always great to see you. And you mentioned our new Congresswoman Hoyle. It's been great to have you in the delegation all along, but also great to have more women in the delegation.
Indeed.
Too. And I'm sure you're enjoying that too.
I am very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Stegman.
Thank you, Chair. Great to see you, Congresswoman. Welcome.
Nice to see you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Yeah, women rule.
They certainly do in this county.
They rule in Oregon. Yes. So thank you for representing us so well. I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm wondering about the CHIPS Act. Are there any active potential either new or existing companies that the CHIPS Act might have an impact on to either expand or move here to Oregon?
Absolutely. And because most of that bill went through the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, I'm thrilled to have had a significant role in getting it over the finish line. I do note that there was a period of time when there was an effort to just pass the CHIPS part. I want to note that the and science part of that bill is really significant. It's actually a bigger financial investment, and that's where the research and development and the National Science Foundation and the National Institute Institute of Standards and Technology, and all these other really important efforts are going to be strengthened. And also, as a member, along with Senator Wyden, on the statewide task force, we're doing everything we can to get information out to potential stakeholders, to companies about the resources that will be available through that legislation. And stay tuned. There's a lot happening in that space. It gives us a tremendous opportunity, and it really is about domestic manufacturing and growth of the industry. So it gives us a tremendous opportunity to grow the industry. And as we know, in a state that is very dependent on income tax, those high-paying jobs are critical. So just stay tuned. There's a lot going on. I know that, for example, Secretary Raimondo has done a great job of getting information out. The administration is working hard on implementing these, the CHIPS and Science, but also the other infrastructure, Inflation Reduction Act, to getting resources out. And I know it's a priority of the governor as well. So.
Fantastic.
Stay
I
tuned.
appreciate you bringing up the science portion, because we really haven't heard that much about it.
Yeah, a lot of the work that's done in the semiconductor field is in R&D, and that's where those investments are and science part of that as well. So, and the National Science Foundation, for example, they fund a lot of research and academic grants, and so this was a great bill for bolstering their work as well.
Excellent. Well, I didn't really have any other questions other than just to highlight how much we appreciate your priorities that align so closely to Multnomah County's priorities. And before you were here, we were talking about WIC and SNAP, and so the fact that you're working on legislation. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what you're trying to do to boost WIC?
Yes, we have a bill that will strengthen WIC and kind of streamline the program. And it's something that's really important. A lot of the child nutrition programs, including WIC and the school nutrition programs, go through the Education Workforce Committee. So I'm committed to that, because we know that when infants and children get a good start in life, they do better, and we do better as a society and a community. So strengthening the WIC program, closing some of the gaps, and streamlining some of the programs. It allows for some virtual eligibility determinations and things that where we learned we could do things in the pandemic in different ways. If they're working well, let's carry them over and make things easier for our families.
Great. Well, thank you so much for working on behalf of Oregonians, and I appreciated you talking about the Bill of Rights for parents and students. That's like banning books. Like, what century do we live in? Just keep up the good fight, and thank you so much for representing Oregon and Multnomah County's values. And thank you for being here today.
I appreciate that. And I do want to note, too, as someone who represents many rural counties, a lot of these issues are very important to rural counties as well. Housing, behavioral health care, broadband, children and families. So I know I share values with Multnomah County, but they're shared values across the 1st Congressional District and really across our state and country. And thank you for mentioning the importance of the Parents and Students Bill of Rights. It was really an honor to work on that and to get support from more than 250 education and civil rights organizations, because we know how important public education is to our future, and we need to have a school system, a public education system that really does offer that well-rounded education. And the book banning and things we're seeing in other states concerns me greatly for the future of our country. And I'll close on that note by saying I was recently talking to a teacher who said, I wish I could get my kids to read books. They won't get off their phone. So we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and the thought that we're taking books away from students baffles me, because not only do they have phones, they have the internet and television. So I want to do what's best for our system of public education, and that's a system that does not discriminate, that teaches a clear and accurate view of history so we can learn from that. And that gives a well-rounded education that includes the arts as well. When we talk about the mental health issues facing our students, and that comes from being afraid of gun violence, rightly afraid of gun violence, and the stress of the pandemic and climate change and things that are facing our students today. Arts education is a great way to help with the mental health of students and prepare students to be creative and innovative for the workforce.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And just another kudos is thank you so much for working on behalf of our transgender community. We know that there's just, there just really aren't words for what is happening and the vitriol that is in our communities and threatening and making many of our youth and adults feel unsafe. And they are unsafe. And so if we don't stand up, who is? And so I really appreciate you carrying that forward as well.
Thank you. And we've done some work. I'm a co-chair on the Equality Caucus, and we have worked with closely with the National Center for Transgender Equity, whose executive director is the son of a former Republican colleague of mine, Ileana Russ-Leighton from Florida. And the center has been really helpful in helping us tell stories and talk to people. You know, I just want people to look into their heart and know that discrimination is wrong. And so we're going to do everything we can to fight this horrible bill that we expect to be coming to the floor, picking on, as you know, an already challenging a population that's already feeling under attack. I just want to note that, you know, Commissioner Jayapal's sister is a colleague of mine, and she has a transgender child and is a very passionate voice for equality and non-discrimination.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I know that Commissioner Jayapal would have loved to be here. She is traveling in India right now, and so, but is obviously staying well informed of the work that's happening in Congress, and is really just, you know, just as happy to.
I'll say on the record that her sister is a rock star,
I know,
like she is too.
Yes, and she always gets the good inside track on that. But I just appreciate you being here. I also just want to acknowledge you are always so wonderful to work with, and are so engaged in what's happening here at Multnomah County and the issues that we're facing. But it's also fantastic working with your team, and I know you have some of your team
Al
members
Bannon
here
from my
today.
team is here, and Sarah Basler.
Yeah.
My,
Well, they are always
my district director and deputy district director. I can't do what I do without my amazing staff.
No, they're great to work with, and we always have such a wonderful time in reaching out and connecting with your office on things. So just want to acknowledge them, and I just appreciate all the work that they do as well. And just appreciate your continued partnership. We do share many of these priorities that we have in terms of the direction that we want to see, the investments that we know that are important for not just, as you said, the people in Multnomah County, but for really for people all over. And I think that the child care tax credit is one of those examples where it impacted. I mean, we talk about child poverty. The impact on child hunger was cut by 40% during COVID for that. And I know, just as you know, at the county, we're looking at the ending of the ARPA and the CARES dollars and really making some hard decisions about that, but also looking at those things that we want to keep. And I think I just want to say thank you for fighting the good fight in terms of the investments that had been made over the last 3 years at the federal level, that we're fighting, you know, that you're fighting to keep, that we know that made a difference, even though, as you said, the environment that you're in right now is not the best for moving forward and making some progress on the things that we'd like to see. I just appreciate that you're in there doing the hard work and raising your voice and using, using the power that you have to really continue to work to get those things. And hopefully between the administration and the ability to move forward on some of these things through compromise and good work, we will be getting some good progress on that. But just appreciate everything that you're doing every day in DC for us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, with that, we have finished our agenda for the board briefing today, and we will be back here on Thursday, February 6th for our regularly scheduled board meeting. With that, we are adjourned.